I think there's a huge scarcity mindset when you're a pre-med, which is if there's an opportunity, you have to take it. And what that means is you might end up like overexerting yourself. So things that I'm really proud of are things that I did for 4 years or more than 4 years. So I was a hospice volunteer. I spent time with people during the last few months of their lives. I was an MA in a dermatology practice where they let me get involved with surgeries. And then one thing that I got asked about in almost every single interview is I was a barista during my gap year, and that was just something I did for fun. And I think things that make you stand out and make you look like you have a little bit of work-life balance or you care about things other than science are a really, really good thing to share. So everyone was curious about that for sure.
And so we have about 2 hours in total left of the day today. It's going to be the next hour of a direct Q&A with current medical students who you may know from social media, who are going to be able to share their experiences so far, how they got into medical school, what medical school is truly like, and then also talk a little bit about things that they wish they knew when they were in your shoes. So with that being said, we're going to have the current fantastic medical students who are currently in medical school, ready to answer your live Q&A questions. So continue writing them live right now in the Q&A, and I'll be directing questions to individual students on the panel. I'm first going to have the students who are on introduce themselves and talk a little bit about kind of their background, how they decided to go into medicine, and anything unique about it. So we're going to start with how I see it on the screen. I'm just going to start with each individual. Just introduce yourself, say where you're sort of calling in from, and anything in particular you want to share about your background. So I see Sana first over here.
Okay, cool. Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me. I'm Sana. I'm in between MS2 and MS3. I'm actually studying for step one, which for me is in around a week now. I was born and raised in California. I'm a transfer student, so I went to the University of Michigan, transferred to USC for undergrad, and now am a second year at UC Irvine Medical School. So happy to share about the California process in particular. And yeah, really just ready to answer any of your questions.
Great, thanks, Ambrose.
Hi everyone, I'm Ambrose. I am a second year medical student at Kansas City University. I'm actually originally from California. I went to community college at LA Pierce College and then I transferred to UCLA. I also did my master's in stem cell biology at USC before going to med school. If you have any questions, I'm free to answer them. Thank you for having me.
Great, Linda.
Hi, so we have a lot of Californians here. So I'm Linda. I currently actually go to med school at USC. And then I was in Texas, at Rice for my undergrad. For some more background, I'm also from California originally, so that was a huge motivator for me to come back. But yeah, the whole point of this session, I just want to be as open of a book as possible since I feel like my particular eagerness to be part of this session is to share kind of both the good and like the not so good about med school since I feel like there's so much that I've learned ever since starting med school, so happy to be here as well.
Great, and Luke.
Hey, I'm Luke. I'm a MS2 in the middle of my clinical rotations at a med school in the UT system. Non-trad applicant, also doing an MBA right now along with my med school, and I'm also at a brand new medical school. So if you have any questions about any of those things, happy to answer them.
Great, and then Morgan.
Hey everyone, my name is Morgan. I am also from California, so that's kind of funny. I am in between my second and third year. I'm completing a research year at Kansas City University. I got my master's at Tufts Med in Boston. I'm also a mom, and if any one of you is a parent pre-med, feel free to ask any questions on that. I'm also getting a dual degree in bioethics, so if you have any questions on dual degrees, I'm happy to answer that as well.
Awesome. So we're going to get through as many questions as we possibly can today, and I'm going to be directing questions individually to different panelists today. So the first question that I want to ask as we get more and more in the Q&A is something that you mentioned, Luke, was that you're a non-traditional applicant. Can you give us a little bit more about your background and how you feel like that played a role in you getting admitted to medical school?
Yeah, absolutely. So I always kind of knew I wanted to do medicine in some form or fashion, but I didn't really know like whether I wanted to be like a nurse, paramedic, PA, doctor. And so when I graduated, didn't really want to commit to like going through all that college yet, not knowing what I wanted to do. So I actually joined the military. Did 6 years as a medic in the military. And then about two years into that, decided that I really enjoyed medicine and wanted to go pursue it full time. So I went Guard and Reserves and then went back to school, and worked part time in the military, part time doing school, and then applied as a non-trad about 6 or 7 years after graduating high school. And it played an just huge role in my application, to be honest with you. I think I talked about it and was asked about it in about every interview I did. It just allowed me to get a lot of really cool clinical experience in a lot of like non-traditional environments. So like I lived in the Arctic Circle as a medic, providing for an Inuit village for a couple months. Got to travel around the world doing medicine. Got to see medicine from just kind of all kinds of different viewpoints. And I think just getting out and having those experiences was huge in the application process.
Awesome. Thanks so much for that answer. And as people are asking questions in the Q&A, if any of you aren't currently like speaking or giving an answer, you're welcome to write in the Q&A and just answer questions that way, so we can try to get through as many as possible. And I see some people directing questions individually to people, which is great as well. Several people actually have asked Morgan a question about being a mom and being a medical student. There are a couple people on here like Zoe and an anonymous attendee who are also parents. And they wanted to hear a little bit about what the balance is like, whether it's in the preclinical setting or also when you're on clinical rotations, about being a parent and also being a medical student.
Yeah, I'm happy to chat about that. So I had my first two kids before medical school. My second son was 9 months old when I started medical school, so he was still pretty young when I had started. So I was really working on finding a balance. What I think is really important is having a supportive support system, really. My husband does a lot at home for us, and I would treat medical school kind of like a job. So I'd wake up and get ready for the day, and I would study from like 8 to 5, including class time. And then I would take the rest of the evening off after dinner. And if I had to study, I would study after the kids went to bed. And that was really what worked for me my first 2 years. And right now I'm on a research year, so that's a little bit different. But I did just have my third baby a few months ago. So I will let you guys know how it goes when I'm in my rotations next year. Having 3 kids, I have no advice for you on that yet, but preclinically, I think treating school like a job is kind of a really good way to balance med school and family life.
Great point. A question for Ambrose is, how did you feel like how did you know you were ready to apply? Like, at what point in your whole journey did you say, okay, I think I'm going to apply this cycle? It's a question from Catherine. Like, how did you feel like, okay, I think everything's ready to go?
To be honest, that's a really good question. And my honest answer is that you really never really know when you're really ready for medical school. It's just a leap of faith that you have to take. You've worked so hard throughout your entire life to get to where you are at currently, and then like if you like, for me specifically, when I applied for med school, I was like, it's now or never. If I keep this up, I'm gonna keep pushing forward, and I'm gonna keep leaving. Like, it's because years are gonna pass by, and I feel like I won't be able to get to where I am. So honestly, if my advice from the bottom of my heart is just to take a leap of faith. You worked hard, you got to where you're at. If it doesn't work out, there's always next year, but you never really know when you're ready. So just trust yourself. It's a gut instinct.
Awesome, thanks. Sun, a question for you. It's about the MCAT, and there's a question about how much of the things that are on the MCAT do you feel like are directly then taught again in medical school, or is it actually a beneficial test for later on? Like, is the preparation you put into the MCAT, does it pay dividends later on when you're studying?
Yeah, that's a good question. Many of you might be studying for the MCAT, and for me, the MCAT kind of wrecked me. It's a super long test, it's a lot of knowledge, and I think what it teaches you the most of is just how to study. Like, what is your learning style? What do you need to succeed on a test that big? I will say the content, you like run through that content in the first week of medical school, and then you start moving forward with like very medically focused content. So I will say that the exact content that might be on the MCAT, I don't feel like I think about anymore because that's like the foundation. But the way I studied for the MCAT and now the way I'm studying for step one, those grew upon each other. So that part is definitely important.
Got it. Question for you, Linda, from Rujula, who says that, obviously preparing and studying in medical school is very stressful, and it always feels like, people are so smart and put together. But, at the same time, Or were there moments in your kind of journey that you felt like you weren't smart enough or you weren't good enough? And how do you overcome those times?
Yeah, I love that question since it's like a running joke where I'm always just like, oh, is an imposter, imposter syndrome, like always like hits me in every single environment I step into. Um, and like truly like the reality in my life is like that never really leaves. Like as I'm starting my clerkships now, like even after like taking step one and getting through like all of pre-clerkships, I still struggle with that. But I think just reminding myself that like truly like the people who succeed in med school are not the people who are just smart. Like they're the people who like truly like put in the time to like work and study. And so like I just try to remind myself like everyone has different gifts and talents that are like truly so important to like be used in the medical career and that's what brought them into like this profession and into medical school. So like just reminding yourself like you were chosen for a reason and like even as a pre-med like the work that you're putting in like will produce results and like don't ever see yourself as less because truly like comparison is a thief of joy and I'm like very guilty of that. So I don't know if that's really answering the question, but I feel you. So
No, of course. And so remember, everybody, when you're writing questions, write them in the Q&A portion at the bottom instead of the chat. The chat isn't always visible and it goes away. So make sure you're writing in the Q&A where we can directly answer them today or later on if we can. But Arvind actually asks Luke a question here about the UT med school system and also about kind of being involved in different aspects of military service or types of other service towards people and what that experience was like for you and if you have any recommendations about it.
Yeah, can you read the question off? Sorry, I was typing another one, so I didn't see that one.
No worries, just kind of how you gain experience in medicine, how you use your background to kind of apply and how you discussed it. It's not really like the direct question, but
Oh, gotcha. All right, yeah. So like for me, obviously, I didn't do much shadowing because I had like lots of clinical experience. And so I think getting clinical experience, whether you do an MA, an EMT, even things like patient care transporter or scribing, is really big in the application process, right? Everyone kind of shadows. That's kind of like the go-to easy way of getting clinical experience. But getting to have actual patient care, getting to like talk to patients, be a part of the care team, played a really big role for me. And so if you can get one of those jobs, I think it kind of shows you a different side of medicine versus just like the bystander observer role that you get while you're shadowing. And so that's kind of how it played out for me a lot. I don't know if that really answers your question or not.
no, that's great. Absolutely. I actually have a question from Zoe here for that I want to ask everybody, if you don't mind. It's a question: how many medical schools did everyone apply to? How many do you recommend applying to? So I kind of want to just go around and just a quick, brief answer from everybody about it, starting with Morgan.
Yeah, I applied to 25 MD and about 25 DO schools, and I'm currently at a DO school.
Awesome, Sana.
I applied to 30 MDs and I'm currently at an MT school.
Ambrose.
I believe I applied to 30 DOs and 25 MDs. I got into both, but I decided to go to Kansas City with a university, which is a DO school.
Gotcha. And Linda.
I applied to about 15. I don't actually have the exact number in my head, but I don't recommend doing what I did since I applied very last minute, but I ended up going to an MD school.
Okay, awesome. And Luke.
I applied to 8 MD schools, no DO schools. The process is very different for Texas residents than the rest of the country. We kind of have our own application system, and our schools are required to take at least 90% in-state applicants. So it's very different. How many schools you apply to is very dependent on like your application and where you're applying.
Gotcha. A question from Aaron Cruz here in the chat is I want to direct it towards Sana. It's what are some things or experiences that you feel like made your application stand out and you feel like maybe it made a big impact in you getting into medical school?
Yeah, great question. I think there's a huge scarcity mindset when you're a pre-med, which is if there's an opportunity, you have to take it. And what that means is you might end up like overexerting yourself. So things that I'm really proud of are things that I did for 4 years or more than 4 years that I continued to stay involved in. So I was a hospice volunteer. I spent time with people during the last few months of their lives, and I had some really great experiences and stories from that. I was an MA in a dermatology practice where they let me get involved with surgeries. And so I had a lot to say about that experience. And then one thing that I got asked about in almost every single interview is I was a barista during my gap year, and that was just something I did for fun. And I think things that make you stand out and make you look like you have a little bit of work-life balance or you care about things other than science are a really, really good thing to share. So everyone was curious about that for sure.
Oh, that's awesome. And so then kind of going on the same topic of balance, a question for you, Linda, about balance. An anonymous attendee asks, what's a daily schedule for you like in terms of classes? And then maybe like, how do you balance those classes and the studying that you need to do with just other things in life?
Yeah, I'm happy to touch on that more from like the perspective of having started my clerkships. So the schedule kind of no longer really exists for me, where it's a lot more determined by like the rotation that I'm on. Clerkships essentially is like now I'm just transitioning to doing my trainings into hospitals, and there's like 8 different core rotations like psychiatry, neurology, internal medicine, and like so forth. So the day really depends on the particular site and the attendings that you work with. For me right now, I'm on psychiatry, so I typically wake up around 5:30 to drive over to the hospital, and I pretty much spend my whole day there until around like 6:30, and then I come home, make dinner, and I study. That schedule looks a lot different during pre-clerkship years, which for anyone else, if you guys want to touch on, but I felt like my schedule was a lot more flexible. My school gave me a lot of asynchronous lectures, so I very much was the I don't go to class, I watch my lectures online kind of person. And so it was very much like you can really structure your day however you want as long as you get your material done. So it's very a lot more flexible during pre-clerkship years, and clerkship is a lot more you stick to kind of like a more routine.
Yeah, and that flexibility is so interesting because different medical schools have different requirements for in-person lectures or watching asynchronously. So that's a really good point and something for everybody to look into when you're applying to medical schools. And a question for Ambrose here from Shannon. Could you elaborate a little bit more about how you decided to go to your medical school, what your thought process was like, and kind of your thoughts now that you're a current medical student about it?
Yeah, so when choosing between the MD schools and the DO school I'm currently at, I mainly looked at like resources and the match rates of each school, and I chose based on what I felt like had the most opportunity for me and the most room for me to grow, and whatever is most convenient. Because the MD school I got into was the Uniform Service University School of Medicine, and I felt like my goals weren't exactly aligned with their school, so I ended up choosing KCU.
Great. Just moving on to additional questions. A question for you, Morgan, is the following. From Kendall. Kendall asks, how did your study habits change or develop in medical school compared to college and kind of the things that you've done before? Because it's a kind of a different approach in medical school, right?
Yeah, so if any of you guys follow me on Instagram, you know that I talk a lot about how I had a lower GPA from college. I really didn't know how to study, and that's something that I kind of figured out through my master's program, kind of by just the pressure of it. I knew I had to perform well in order to kind of increase my odds of going into medical school, so I had no choice. But a lot of trial and error went into that, and it's gonna be different for everyone. But once I got into medical school, I really kind of I think Sana had said that she stopped going to lectures in person. Is that right? I did the same. So I stopped going to lectures in person just because I felt like I could get more done at home with taking breaks in the lectures when they were not actually live. So I could take a break and kind of process what I had learned, and then I could transfer that to practice questions or Anki. And I felt like that was really a good way for me to learn. But again, it's different for everyone, so it's hard to say. A lot of trial and error, though.
Right. And so Nandini asks a question about gap years. So could you guys remind me if any of you took gap years? Just raise your hand and I can go. Okay. Okay, awesome. Starting with Sana, maybe could you talk a little bit more about the value that you feel like the gap year brought you and how you were able to use it as part of your application?
Yeah, for sure. There is a lot of thought on whether a gap year is important or not, and I've never met someone who regretted their gap year. I think every single person had the best time spending it with family, friends, getting more experience, and ultimately, most people make themselves a stronger candidate for med school. And this is because the gap year gives you time outside of your education to see what are the holes in my application. Like, do I have enough clinical experience? Do I have enough volunteering? Do I have enough research? And that's your time to really nail those in. I also stayed at home because my grandpa was on hospice, so I just wanted to be with my family. But I also knew that I wanted more clinical experience and I just wanted to travel. And I think like those things honestly can't wait. I just wanted to do it right after school. And I came into med school with so much more energy and I was ready to tackle how hard med school would be. So I recommend it.
Gotcha. What about you, Ambrose?
Yeah, so likewise, I don't regret my gap years. I actually took gap years. I don't know if technically one of them I did my master's, so I don't know if that's the technical gap years, but then did a year where I didn't do anything like school related. I took the opportunity to focus on strengthening my applications, like doing research, just basically taking care of my well-being. And then like for me, it's not a gap year, it's more of like a growth year. It helped me like discover why I really wanted to do medicine, whether or not this was the right goal for me. It helped solidify this idea. And yeah, I don't regret it at all.
Cool. And same question to Morgan.
Yeah, so kind of like Ambrose, I did my master's in one of those gap years. So I took a year after graduating. I had my first son, and then I worked as a scribe in the ER for that year. Well, I worked throughout college as a scribe and then continued in that year after. And then I did my master's. And then during that last gap year, I was a research assistant on a clinical trial through my master's program, and I completed my thesis. So I think all those things definitely contributed to having a solid application. So getting stuff done in those years is definitely beneficial. I'm very happy that I did those.
Gotcha. Very cool. A question for Linda is about shadowing. Do you feel like shadowing was something that was easy to get, difficult to get? And did schools ask for it, or did you feel like it was kind of like a requirement to know what you're getting yourself into?
So on one end, as like a pre-med, I definitely fell into the trap of like, okay, I need to hit a certain number of shadowing hours. For some context, I was also in college during COVID, so I do feel like there was slightly more like leniency in terms of not having like that many shadowing hours, but I think just like on a outside of just like applying to med school, like actually understanding like what you're getting yourself into is like super important. And so for me, like I didn't do as much shadowing as I would have wanted to, but I did get involved in a lot of clinical experiences while I was in college. And like I think overall it's just like getting yourself involved in the setting that you eventually will see yourself in is super important since I think like even now as I'm like starting clerkships, like that itself is a whole new experience that's like totally different from shadowing since you're actually like involving yourself in patient care and like actually getting to like be a part of the like healthcare team. But like really getting that exposure early on is super important.
Right? And those clinical years of medical school are completely different than shadowing, exactly. But they're really, really interesting. And a question now for Luke is about kind of exam taking in medical school. The first 2 years of medical school are traditionally, pre-clinical, where you're doing a lot of studying and taking exams. Destiny's asking here, like, how frequently are exams? Do you feel like you have enough time to prepare for them? And is that basically like all you're doing?
Yeah, so again, this one kind of depends on your program because every program does it differently. So, like the one I'm at, we don't do 2 years of preclinical. We do 18 months. And during the 18 months of pre-clerkship, we have one major exam every block. And so our anatomy and everything is all looped into one big final at the end. And so our blocks are typically 2 to 3 months long. And so we have it's like 3 days of exams because you have your anatomy exam, your didactics exam, and your OSCE. And we just have those once a block. So every 3 months or so, we have one big exam. But we also have quizzes every week to kind of like let you know how you're doing. And they didn't really count for anything. They actually just switched it for the classes under us now. They do count towards the final grade. But for us, they were just kind of a measure of how you were doing so you could identify weak areas and whatnot. So we felt like we had plenty of time for exams. But obviously, if you took advantage of that and like didn't study continuously throughout it, you would get behind and you did not feel like you had plenty of time. But as long as you stayed up on things and stayed current, we were very fortunate at my program. We had plenty of time in between big tests. But I'm curious what the other schools did, because I know we do things kind of weird at mine.
Yeah, like Sana, what's your school like for exams for first 2 years?
Yeah, my school has exams at the end of every block. So for example, we'll like learn all of cardiology and then at the end we'll do a big test. The test is on our iPads. And then what's really nice about UCI is you actually see your grade right after the test. So we all go into this big room, our test scores come out on our laptop or on like on our iPads and we get to grade them right there. So you don't go home wondering or being stressed. You can just move forward with your life. And all of our test questions have answers to them. So if you got something wrong, you can kind of understand, justify why they were wrong. And all of our professors also come to that. So if we have any questions or we want to like argue with them and get some points back, we can totally do that too. So everything is done in person, but on our laptop, on our iPads, sorry.
Awesome. Moving on to a question from an anonymous viewer for Ambrose. It's about the personal statement. Do you have any advice for a personal statement in particular, kind of like how to close it off and make sure it's leaving an impact? Like, do you kind of just summarize the things that you've talked about, or how did you feel like you went about writing your personal statement to make it meaningful as part of your app?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So when tackling the personal statement, I feel like it's one of the hardest aspect of the medical application to tackle. But to be honest, just be genuine, to tell your life story, create a story in a way where it leaves the audience in awe and wanting for more. How I do it is that I did like for my personal statement, I opened it with like an open-ended topic, and then I ended it off with something that I learned, how I could grow, and then how it helped me realize my passion for medicine and how I can be a better person as a result and how I can be a better physician overall. So just be genuine, just don't be generic. Your life story is different, your life story is unique. So just make sure to make it shine.
Nice. And a question for Linda here from Victoria. Were there any classes you took as an undergrad or classes maybe you wish you took that you feel like set you apart to succeed in the first couple of years of medical school and just give you a leg up?
Um, that's a good question. I for context was a double major in psychology and women and gender studies, which is very like less in the norm of like what a lot of people apply, usually like biology or like more of like the sciences. I think, you know, majoring in like biology is super interesting for me. I just wasn't that interested in it, and I was just like, I'm just gonna take the pre-med required courses. And my reasoning for like why I took the classes that I did was more so because I was really interested in like women's health and like mental health, and I asked myself like, are these opportunities that I would be able to learn as much once I start med school? And I didn't feel like I would be able to, so I really used my undergrad time to like really immerse myself in those classes. And I think it gives me like interesting perspectives now that like I'm in med school. I don't think it necessarily made me score better on like certain exams, but I do think it did kind of serve as like a slight advantage when I was applying for med school, where almost every interview I had, people asked me like what got me into studying gender studies and then like applying for med school. So I think it brought unique perspectives, but not necessarily gave me like a boost in my actual scores.
Absolutely. That's pretty cool. And I know, Luke, you're typing. I see you typing, but somebody has a direct question for you. Chris was asking, do you have any tips for applying to Texas medical schools if you are a Texas resident and kind of how to go about that?
Yeah, so it's pretty similar to the like outside of Texas application. Like all the same tips that you've been hearing all day apply to the Texas schools as well. The main benefit, though, is since we have our own system and Texas legislature mandates 90% of seats in Texas go to Texas residents, that's a huge benefit. And you should really take advantage of that and apply to all of the Texas schools. Because also, like in our application system for TMDSIS, it's one flat fee. You can send it to every Texas medical school. And so lots like you can go in and like select not to send it to them, but it's the same price. Send it to everyone, cast your net as wide as possible, get out, finish all the secondaries, just give yourself as many chances as you can would be my best advice for Texas schools.
Great. Cool. And question for Morgan now about research. How did that get brought up in your application or like in interviews? Like, did people ask you about research and what weight did that get placed on your application, do you feel like?
Yeah, so actually none of my interviewers asked me about research at all. I kind of volunteered the fact that I was working on a clinical trial and they were interested in that. And then I spoke more about it. But When I applied a few years ago, I didn't feel like research was heavily emphasized in any of my interviews. I mean, I think it can definitely be beneficial. And if you have it, that is something that can really help you. But I personally don't think it's necessary to have research to apply to medical school and get in. It can only help you. That's just my experience, though.
Gotcha. Anyone else have like thoughts about research as a whole? Like, because I know it can be kind of like a one of those topics where some people don't do any research, some people do a lot of research, and then there's everything in between. But a lot of people still end up becoming physicians even without a lot of research. So, anyone else have thoughts about research as a whole in the application process, or how it might have come up in your application or in interviews? Yeah.
I would kind of second what Morgan said. I think there's kind of the notion that everyone needs to do research to get in medical school, but I don't really find that to be factual. I did research just to check the box. I did a semester of bench research and I hated it. And like, I think when I got asked about it in my interviews, I think it was very clear that it wasn't a passion of mine and I did it just to check the box. And I think that kind of hurt me, to be honest with you. So if it's not something you're interested in, don't do it just to check the box. But also realizing that there's research besides like just lab bench research out there. Like you can do community research, you can do research over anything out there, and still kind of spin it into the application cycle. So don't feel like you have to go do hard science research either. Because like in med school, we have to do research for residency. And all of my research in medical school is not basic science researches because I learned my lesson. So there's a lot more opportunities out there. You just kind of seek them.
Gotcha. So we know that one of like the hardest parts of applying is like crafting your why medicine story, right? So when you're interviewing or when you're applying and then when you're interviewing, like there's a question for Ambrose here. Like, how did you convey your interest in becoming a physician while also not kind of almost like saying what everybody else says?
Yeah, that's a really good question as well. It's just I guess for to answer this question is basically trying to tie in your personal experiences throughout your years in undergrad and basically the environment that you are exposed to and how it personally and uniquely helped you choose medicine. I always just say just basically seeing like for me, for example, I come from a low income. I'm first gen. So basically, I've seen personally firsthand like how limited healthcare medicine and access to medicine is with lower income family and households. So that personally helped me understand why I wanted to go to medicine, and my over like that helped me make a decision of trying to make a difference in my community and stuff. And so basically, it's just like a type of like individualized experience and how it really helped you tie into why medicine overall. I don't know if that really answered it, but
No,
I
no,
hope it.
that was awesome. And so, kind of on the topic of the question we had asked earlier, this is going to be for Sana. It's about kind of applying to X amount of schools overall. How many interviews should somebody expect, or maybe not even so much that as like, I just see a question from Melissa, like when you get secondaries from these schools, like how do you answer them quickly in time, like with good explanations and good stories, because like timing is important there, right?
Yeah, so for those who don't know, you submit your primary application, which is like your personal statement and a bunch of big things to all the schools you're applying to. And then around like a month or so after you apply, schools will start to send back secondaries, which are like specific essays for those schools. However, most of them want you to send in those essays within 2 weeks. And say you have 10 schools asking you for 5 essays each in 2 weeks, that's like 50 essays, too much to do. So there's a process called pre-writing, which I highly recommend. And there's really common questions that a lot of pre-meds can plan their answers for. So for example, like 18 of my 30 schools asked me, what are you doing during your gap year? Or explain some sort of like clinical experience, or what's a adverse experience that like made you grow. And you can find these online. You can just search up common secondary questions and pre-write those as you're applying to help you with that. As for interviews, I really think it's like a little bit of luck, a little bit of who's reading it, a little bit of where you chose to apply. I applied to 30 schools, I got 4 interviews and then 3 acceptances.
Gotcha. Very cool. Thanks for that thorough answer about it. Because yeah, secondaries is, I mean, it's a lot of writing that you end up doing as an applicant. So I appreciate that answer. A question for you, Morgan, is from Nayeli. who asks, you go to the hospital, you do your clinicals, you have to come home after a long day and you still have to study and you have other things going on. Like, how do you find the motivation to do that when so much is going on both in the hospital and outside of the hospital as a student?
So I might not be the best person to ask that because I haven't started my clinical rotations yet. I am going into my third year rotations in the summer because I'm technically a third year, but I'm on a research year right now. So that might be a better question for someone else.
Well,
No one else here is the third year though, huh?
well, yeah, it just like for anybody who has to balance so much on the plate in
I see.
one day, it's like it's hard, right? Like you have so many competing
Yes.
interests. It's really hard to balance. So
Yeah.
like, it's something that actually takes a lot of practice. And even like thinking back to my time on clerkships, like if I had time in the hospital where I wasn't like actively doing something, I would just pull up Anki or like study a little bit because there's only so
Yeah.
much a day, right?
I will say all my friends have moved on to their third year. They didn't take a research year, so I have heard from them that it is definitely a challenge. They use the time that they have downtime well. So if you're on a rotation that doesn't have a ton of like standing time, if you're able to sit down, they do use that time to do some Anki or some U-World practice questions. So they have less to do once they get home. Unfortunately, on more time consuming rotations, that isn't always an option. So that I feel like definitely might be harder. And I think that's just something that you kind of have to use self-motivation for and use your time wisely and kind of prioritize.
Absolutely. Thanks so much. For Linda, a question from Adib is about like study strategies that you found useful in medical school. Like, are there certain, ways to cover a lot of content, like ways to take notes or ways to efficiently use your time that you found very helpful, and maybe things that haven't been so helpful or things that you've had to change about your studying?
Yeah, so my unpopular opinion, which I don't know if the rest of the panel agrees, but I don't take notes anymore. Um, I simply watch lectures, and one thing that has been super helpful is a like term called spaced repetition. So spaced repetition essentially is there's just so much information that you have to cover in med school that like learning it and then like seeing it again in like spaced intervals helps you like really like remember that information. And so a platform that a lot of people use, which I'm sure everyone here knows, is like Anki. I'm an Anki fanatic where like I have the app for it. So like as a med student, like you'll constantly be like, doing things, whether it's like pursuing your hobbies or on clerkships, you're just constantly like walking around into hospital. But like having this app on your phone means like anytime you have some downtime, you can just take it out and like study like while you're I don't know, like waiting for your food to migrate or something. Like you can always just be doing like little bits of studying. And I feel like that's what's been helpful for me. And I think ultimately just reminding yourself like study smarter, not harder is like very key in med school since we only have so much time.
100%. Yeah, you have to make the most out of all of the time that you have in a day. And a question for you, Luke, here is I remember you mentioning a little bit about kind of your process of deciding you want to become a physician because there's a lot of different health professions and a lot of different ways to help people. For somebody who's watching right now who isn't 100% certain that they want to become a physician, but they know that they are interested in healthcare, like what are some ways to figure that out and, what are some resources you'd recommend?
Yeah, so I did a panel last night too and got asked the same question. And I kind of tell everyone med school will always be there, right? Med school is never going anywhere. So if you have any other passions in life that you're like, oh, should I go to med school or should I go do this and follow this passion? Go follow it, right? Those may be limited opportunities you can only do at certain times. Med school is always going to be there. There's no such thing as taking too long to apply to medical school. I've got people in my class in their 30s and 40s who have worked whole other careers as engineers or stay-at-home moms, whatever they did, and then they decided to come back to medical school. So if there's something else you're interested in, pursue it. Go see if you like it. If you start it and you love it, great. There's nothing wrong with being a pre-med major and then deciding to go another route. And then if you do it, you pursue those other things, and you come back, it's like, man, I really do like. I wish I would have followed medicine. It's never too late. It's always going to be there. I had like every career possible before deciding to commit to 8 years of school for medicine. So my best advice is just go try it, see what you enjoy.
Perfect. So I see a question from Sedona here, and I want to take in two different directions. It's about pass fail. So I want to ask first Ambrose a question about, do you feel like pass fail is like something that you looked for in a medical school? Was it something that you felt like you valued because it would allow you to focus a little bit differently on your studies, or was that not really a factor in when you were deciding?
It was a really good question. So actually, pass fail curriculum actually was one of my highlights when choosing a medical school. That's one of the reasons why I chose my school over the other school. I think having a pass fail curriculum, it really eases the student's soul and like mentality. It's just like, and it also is like it promotes a more like well balanced and also like a more friendly and cooperative environment within your medical school. Because everyone's so different. Everyone excels in the different things, and basically having like a constant like ranking attached to your name, it really makes a lot of people worry. But like having that pass fail curriculum, there comes pros and cons, but at the same time, it really helps you ease your like your studies, and because med school is really like stressful. There's gonna be a lot of days where you have sleepless nights. But like having that pass fail rather than like other curriculums like ABC, it really makes it much better.
Cool. And so we like have this preconceived notion of what those days of medical school are going to be like. We have ideas of what we think medical school is like. But question for you, Sana, about that is, what now that you're actually a medical student, like what surprised you the most about it? What didn't you expect? And now that you are going through the process, like, is it different than what you thought it was going to be like, or is this kind of what you expected?
Mm, yeah, that's a good question. I like don't remember what I thought med school was gonna be like. It was like this huge like halo. I was like, oh, it's gonna be amazing. And honestly, med school has been really fun so far, and I think it's just like picking the right place. You make good friends, and you're studying something that inspires you. Something that I will say was different than what I expected is how easy it is to get like opportunities. I think when you're a pre-med, you're begging people for research. You're begging people to shadow, and you're in med school, and all of a sudden like the world is your oyster. You can shadow whoever you want, you can do research in anything you want, and it's a matter of identifying what matters to you, how much time you have, and what you care about, and you can be a little bit more selective. So I think my work-life balance has been much better. I think I've had a lot more fun in med school because I just need to focus on that, and I think there's a lot less pressure on doing extracurriculars in medical school. It's a lot more about learning your content and passing your tests. So I think the thing that makes being a pre-med hard is you're doing 1,000 clubs and activities. You never get to sleep and you're always stressed. But now that you're here and the light is at the end of the tunnel, it's a lot better than what I thought.
For sure. Yeah, it is. It is honestly a good time. It's difficult, but it's a good time. And a question for you, Morgan. It's about letters of rec. I see Crystal here ask a question like, do you feel like, you knew who to ask? Were you close to your letter of rec writers? What was your thought process about how to go about asking the people who ultimately ended up writing you strong letters?
So first and foremost, I think the most important thing to touch on is how you ask, because it's important to ask for someone to write you a strong letter, because someone could say, yes, I'll write you a letter, but it might not be a very good one. And most of the time you don't get to see those letters at all. So you kind of are just taking their word for it. So asking for a strong letter is something that was always really pushed on me by my mentees or my mentors as a mentee. But as far as picking who to ask for a letter of rec, I think it's really important to choose people who you feel like know you well as a student. So the professors that I spent a lot of time in office hours with would be the ones that I asked. So I asked a few of my science professors, like a biochemistry and an organic chemistry professor, to write those science letters. And then I asked some of the doctors that I was really close with that I worked with in the ER, and those doctors knew me very well through my 5 years of scribing with them. And then also at my master's program, we had a committee letter, so that was helpful. That was kind of built in. But asking for letters is something that should be kind of personal. They need to know you well, because that's how they're going to write you a really strong letter.
Gotcha. Yeah, it's that key, like Dr. Hageman actually said earlier today during the dean's session. It's about getting strong letters of recommendation, not just kind of getting enough to apply. And a question for Linda here is from Ella in the chat, who says, I feel like I'm really bad at writing. Like, how would you recommend practicing writing, whether it's for something like a personal statement or a secondary essay? Like, what advice would you give for somebody who feels like maybe their writing isn't like where they want it to be?
Writing. I personally really like journaling, and I think just naturally for me, that's where I just like writing down my emotions a lot. And I feel like if we're speaking to context of like writing for like primary and secondary applications, one thing that I've been told that I didn't end up doing, but my recommendation would be like as you're shadowing and going through your experiences as a pre-med, like write down those experiences. Like if you had a really meaningful patient interaction, just like practice writing that down, because ultimately those will help you when you're writing like your primaries, working on your personal statement, or even your secondaries that Sana was mentioning. Like these are experiences that I often find myself drawing on, but when I was applying, like I was like a jumbled mess. I was like there was some patient and some experience, but I couldn't remember. So just write down your emotions. And for me, like having other people to like check my writing like over time for feedback was helpful. But when it comes to actually applying, I would recommend like not asking too many people because you don't want to dilute your own voice.
That's a really great answer. Yeah. And so moving on now to another question for Luke. It's kind of looking back now that you're in medical school, if you could sit down with your pre-med self who was maybe thinking about going into medicine and going through the kind of the motions of all those checklist type things that you felt like were necessary. Like what would you tell him? What would you say looking back, like to maybe do differently or maybe to keep doing?
That's a really good question. Honestly, I would say just to relax. I think so many of us put so much pressure on ourselves because, like, for a lot of us, this is something we've wanted to do since we were like kids. Like, we've all known at some point we wanted to be a doctor, and so like all of that pressure kind of just continuously builds as you go through high school and then get into college, and then you're stuck in a degree plan. We're like, oh, if I don't get into med school, what am I going to do? And you kind of start putting all this pressure on yourself. And the reality is, like, you don't need to. Like, it'll work out. Like, if you're truly dedicated to this path, it'll work out. It may not be your first go round. It may not be your second go round. Shoot, it may not be your third go round. But if you're truly dedicated to it and keep applying, keep critiquing your app, like, you're going to get there eventually. There's plenty of med schools in the country. There's plenty of opportunities. You'll get there. I think a lot of us probably spent too much effort, which is kind of weird to say out loud on the application process. Like if I could go back, I would remind myself to enjoy the little things a lot more going throughout undergrad. Like don't sacrifice your undergrad experience to pursue medicine. Like you can do both. Like they're not mutually exclusive events.
Yeah, and what you mentioned there is such a key point because there's right now there's over 600 people watching, right? And it feels like almost like if you're one of these 600 people, everyone else is like your competition, like, oh no, there's only so many spots and it's such a tough process. But what you really should realize is that the people who are putting in the work to prepare and to be at something like this today and to learn and to try to absorb as much information as possible, like you can all become physicians and there's enough spots in medical schools across the country to make it happen. It's just about applying at the right time and doing the best you can to craft your own application. So I want to keep going through questions because the questions that you're asking are awesome. So keep it going in the Q&A. A question I have for Linda here from Dia is, it's kind of general, but when you're writing the activities section on the application, right, and you're kind of going through all of your activities, like any specific advice for how to kind of make your activities pop and actually stand out and relay what you actually did in them rather than just being kind of like bullet points that somebody can skip over?
Yeah, I have so many thoughts on this, just because Um, before even like talking about how we're writing each individual activity, what I did that I found really helpful was like I just like had a whiteboard and I wrote down like every possible little thing that I ever did. Because ultimately you only have like I believe it was 20 activities, someone correct me if I'm wrong, but like I ended up doing I spread myself too thin in college basically, and I ended up having more activities than I could actually fit. So it's a matter of also choosing, oh, 15, thank you. It's a matter of like choosing which activities to include that kind of paints your narrative of like why you are applying to med school in the first place and why you want to pursue medicine. So start there first, and then once you have that kind of theme, because essentially when I listed out all my activities, that's when I realized I was like, oh, I like accidentally just basically did everything related to like mental health and like gendered health that I was really passionate about. And then from there, as you're writing down your activities, I didn't use like a bullet approach. I just used more of like my narrative, where every activity I wrote was kind of like reinforcing my narrative of like, this is the kind of physician I want to be down the line. So like these are activities and these are the stories from these experiences that really made me like convince me that I really want to pursue medicine to become a future like blank and blank doctor. I don't know if that makes sense, but
No,
yeah.
it absolutely does because like it's something that really matters. And I want to ask Sana a question here actually about when you're applying, right? When you tell people you're interested in becoming a physician, right? Like I'm sure a lot of people have advice or there's people all over, there's a lot of resources and there's people all over the place who have things to say. I have two questions based on that. One, it's just based on something I saw in the Q&A. Were there any like high yield resources you felt like were really helpful when you were applying in general, whether it's like for applications as a whole or the MCAT? And then two, was there like a particular piece of advice or specific resource that like really stood out that you felt like made a difference for you?
Okay, ooh, high yield. So the biggest things I would use, I guess, for the MCAT, I'll start there, is practice. So make sure you do practice problems. The AAMC, which like delivers the MCAT, actually has their own selection of questions and question banks. Would highly recommend those. Like the test writer is giving you questions that mimic what the MCAT is going to look like. So absolutely use those. UWorld is awesome for more practice questions. So I think that for the MCAT is what I would recommend. As for the other parts of the med school app process, I actually used Med School Coach before I even like got involved with you guys in this way when I was a pre-med. So I did virtual shadowing through Med School Coach, and I got like 20 hours from that, and I got exposure to a lot of different specialties that I wouldn't like. I don't know a neurosurgeon, but I got to like fake shadow a neurosurgeon through Med School Coach. And then another one is Dr. Ryan Gray on YouTube, and he like walks through people's applications, and that gave me a good idea of how people who were successful wrote and how people who were unsuccessful wrote. So those ways of just seeing examples are the highest yield things that I would say. As for the biggest piece of advice, I think I'm just gonna reiterate what everyone else is saying. Now that I'm here, I really wished I relaxed back then. You are all so motivated and talented, but there's only so many hours in the day, and you'll regret like not spending time with your family or not going to those parties and like doing all those fun things. So if I were to go back and tell my younger self to do anything, I'd be like, just relax. You're doing so much. And you'll get in. And even if it takes like an extra year or two, that's totally okay. Like a gap year is a very, very positive thing. Yeah.
True. And I want to ask every single person actually that question about like the single biggest piece of advice like you were talking about, because I want to make sure we hit on that in the last 10 minutes we have on this session. So I'm going to go one by one and starting with Ambrose. And like, what is the single biggest piece of advice that you would give to somebody who's here on a Saturday watching live, who's interested in becoming a physician? Like, what would you tell them?
Yeah, so the biggest advice is self-care. Make sure to take care of yourself. I know getting into med school and becoming a physician is a very big deal for many of us, if not all, but your self-well-being, your self-care is the most important factor. Make sure to get rest and make sure to just be you and enjoy life while you can. Life is short, so make the best out of it.
Awesome. Linda, same question.
Feel like we're all touching on a similar theme here, but I think, yeah, truly just like develop your hobbies. You only have your 20s once in your life. So, like, your hobbies will shape you and it will shape the kind of doctor you'll eventually become because, like everyone's saying, like, you're gonna make it if you truly, really want to. Like, there's so many resources, so many networks out there supporting you. Um, like, ultimately these hobbies are ones that will shape you as a doctor, but also will be like the things that you lean on when the journey in medicine gets tough. Like for me, it's running. Whenever I get stressed, I run. And so like having that for me in med school has been like so key to my well-being that like having that early on and developing that like during your 20s is like super, super important.
Yeah, absolutely. Luke, same question for you. Single biggest piece of advice you would give to somebody watching.
Yeah, I mean, I think I answered it earlier about relaxing, but again, just learn to give yourself grace would be my other one, right? I feel like it's really easy to get caught up in like realizing how much you're not doing right. Then like someone else was saying earlier, I don't remember who was saying it, like you're doing so much. Like even just to get to this point, like the fact that you're on this call today, you're doing so much already in your pursuit of this goal. So like take a step back and like realize that not everything's going bad, even though sometimes it feels like that. Learn to give yourself grace early in the process because like things don't get easier once you get in per se. Like a lot of people say the hardest part is getting in. I'm not sure that's entirely true. I think med school is pretty difficult as well. And so the more you can give yourself grace and kind of reset your reality of realizing how much you're doing, I think it'll set you up to be very helpful going through the process.
Gotcha. And same question for you, Morgan.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely agree with what everyone else has said, and I feel the same way. Something else that I think is super important as a pre-med and even now in medical school is having a really strong why. I touched on this in the chat or in the an answer on the Q&A. Having a really strong why will take you really far because there are going to be days when you're not motivated. There are going to be days when you're feeling really burnt out, when you don't really want to study. But having a really solid why, like why medicine, why I want to be a doctor, will give you that motivation when you really need it. And I think it's something that is going to be very beneficial throughout the pre-med process. And also even now in medical school, I use it a lot when I'm feeling burnt out and I need some extra motivation.
Perfect. Yeah. And so we have about 7 more minutes to continue with some questions. And remember, the ones that we get to today, great. The ones that we don't, we will try to get all of them answered and sent to your emails by Monday. Question directly for Ambrose from Caroline in the Q&A. It's, as a fellow first-gen student, like, how do you feel like there were did you feel like certain things were harder for you because of that, especially going into a traditionally competitive field like medicine?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So as a first gen, it was initially very difficult for me to navigate like the whole application process and like what I needed to do to become more competitive. That's why I feel like that's why I chose my specialty, which is not like the traditional specialty major for like biology. And my undergrad major was sociology. And so basically, it's really hard because I don't have the guidance that many of the my classmates had as a first gen. So it was really difficult, but then like if you find the right mentors, if you reach out to your professors, if you take every opportunity you have available and make the best out of it, I think it will work out. Just believe in yourself. You've gotten to where you're at based on your own capabilities. So just don't have any regrets and keep pushing forward.
Perfect. And I see a question from Axel about did anyone do EMT? If so, how was that experience for you? Personally, actually, that was my biggest clinical experience when I was applying to medical school. I had volunteered back in my hometown, and then at the university that I was at, I worked like as a part-time EMT on nights and weekends. So I think the key is to be able to speak to how the clinical experience that you've gotten, whether it's being an EMT or working at a physician's office or any sort of clinical experience where you see patients on a regular basis, kind of relating that to why you feel like you want to become a physician, because it's one way to expose you to the field of medicine, right? And ultimately, what admissions deans look for, like they said in the panel earlier today, is to see, is this person ready for medical school? Have they fully evaluated what being a physician is like? And have they explored that? Have they explored that versus other fields? And are they ready now? And so any way that you can get clinical experience, it's really about speaking to your experience doing that. And so for me personally, it was EMT, but there are so many other ways to do it. And I think that's the key. What everyone said today so far is that you're all unique in your own stories, and there's no one traditional mold of who gets into medical school. It's all just about relaying your message and your story to admissions committees. And we've gotten so many questions throughout this session. We have like a couple minutes left. And I want to give each person on the panel an opportunity to, maybe answer a question that wasn't even asked, maybe something that you've always wanted to say to students. I know it's kind of a little bit kind of like the biggest piece of advice, but I want to give you each the chance to just spread your message to the people who are watching now or who are going to be watching later. So starting with Morgan, like, what do you want to say to everybody here who's listening and who wants to become a physician, and they know it's competitive, but they are looking for inspiration?
Yeah, I don't know about you guys, but I had a lot of people who had me question whether or not I really wanted to do medicine, and there were a lot of people who told me that I possibly wouldn't be able to do it. Um, and so what I have to say about that is just don't take too much weight from what they're saying about you. They don't know you, they don't know your situation, they don't know what you're capable of, you do. And so don't listen to the haters. You can do it. Anything you want to do, if you set your mind to it and work hard enough, you can do it.
What about you, Luke?
Yeah, similar thing. If you can't tell, I'm very big on wellness and taking care of yourself. And so, yeah, take care of yourself throughout this process. Like, I think a lot of the reason you hear a lot of the older doctors telling people that are shadowing and stuff, like, oh, don't waste your time going into medicine, go do something else. Like, this isn't worth it. It's because taking care of yourself was not emphasized in medicine in the past. It's really still not emphasized that much. There's kind of a big turn right now happening in medicine where people are putting a lot more emphasis on that. But if you don't take care of yourself, you're never going to be able to take care of your patients. And so give yourself the time, do your hobbies, don't give up the rest of your life for medicine.
Awesome. Linda?
For me, I would say like know your village. For me, like family was like a huge support system for me, so much so that like I decided to like leave Texas and go back to California. Um, but like for all of you guys, like that could be, you know, your classmates, the peer people that you study with, like your research mentors, whoever it is, but like know that like the journey into medicine is incredibly tough, but like it is never done alone because of the people around you who are here to support you. And like even you guys being here and like talking to us, like we also want to be a part of that village for you guys. There's a reason why all of us decide to like start Instagrams and like share about our journeys. And so like if you have questions, like we're always here to talk to you guys about it. But like even being here, like you guys also have like a village. So just know that that's very important.
Thanks so much. What about you, Ambrose? What do you want to say?
Yeah, just bouncing out on everyone else's thoughts. Just believe in yourself. Again, I have said this many times throughout this panel. You've gotten to where you're at today based on your own capabilities and your own hardships. You you overcame each obstacle, and so basically, just believe in yourself and just in life, there's many times that you jump into the unknown, but then like you wouldn't know what the outcome is until you actually experience it for yourself. So just trust the gut and just go for it.
Great. And last but not least, Sana.
Be super, super intentional. I love what everyone else said, and I think part of being intentional when you're applying to medical school is thinking about the things you want to do and doing them well. Don't stretch yourself too thin. Pick things that you're actually passionate about, and in doing that, you're going to get great letters of rec, great hours because you're actually happy to do it. And on that note, this might be a hot take, but definitely explore the other fields in medicine. Like, don't just limit yourself to MD or DO. Check out what a PA is like, check out what a nurse is like. All of those things will teach you a lot about medicine and will also teach you what you might be a good fit for. But regardless, good luck. You coming to this says a lot about how prepared and motivated all of you are. So thanks for joining.
100%. And you can follow everyone on this panel on social media on the premedexperience.com. If you go there, all of the information about how to follow is there. I can't thank you all enough for joining today on this panel. So you guys take care. And we have one more hour left of this session, at most one more hour of this full day that we've been doing.